Hello, welcome back. The Ayatollahs are having a hard time coming to grips with the idea that the Iranian people are willing to risk their lives and sometimes die for the freedoms that are accepted and expected in a nation with a strong tradition of scholarship and many institutions of higher learning. You can't expect them to have learned how to think for themselves and then expect them to not think for themselves. From the Jerusalem Post, Iranian academics warn government neglect of social issues fuels protests. According to the Iranian Students' News Agency, political science researchers had already warned that such a situation was likely to break out earlier this year in a paper titled Analysis of Social Guild Protests in Iran from the Perspective of Street Politics Theory. Khalilullah Sardarnia, a political science professor at Shiraz University, and Hengama Al-Borzi, a PhD student at the university, argued the protests which swept Iran since 2017 were a turning point, with economic and social changes being the main drivers. The paper was published in Alame Tabatabai University's Quarterly of Political Strategic Studies in the spring of 2022. A major factor that makes the protests that have swept Iran since 2017 different than previous protests is that they largely erupt spontaneously, lacking any clear leadership, according to researchers. While protests used to be led by trade unions and civic organizations, workers became pessimistic and distrustful of those organizations and began organizing spontaneous protests over social media. Quote, with the emergence of today's complicated and confusing conditions, discriminations and inequalities, and fear of unknown futures, the inner self has awakened them and warned them to protest and demand for a better life, wrote the researchers. As nature of the protest changed, blue-collar workers moved from the margins of politics to the center of action, taking to the streets to influence government decisions and policy making and make their voices heard, the researchers added. Social media, such as Telegram and Instagram, have become a major factor in mobilizing and generating protest movements, according to the paper. Social media and the use of cell phones have helped people publicize, discuss, and learn about grievances, economic crises, and injustices, driving civilians to gather and protest even without a specific leader. The researchers noted that economic crises and a deterioration in the welfare of citizens has caused the anger and distrust of workers to erupt. They also pointed out protests in 2017 had been almost an unprecedented breaking of taboos and slogans, confrontations with the government, and an increase in radicalism with the acceptance of relatively high political and financial costs to achieve their goals, they said. Workers and students from different sectors have become more strongly united in protests. One example was when students from major universities in Iran expressed support for the rights and protests of trade unions, including truck drivers and teachers. Researchers noted the move by blue-collar and white-collar workers to protest together could force the government to accept their demands and reduce social inequalities in the present and future. The authors concluded the paper by pointing out the recent protests show that the people of Iran from all walks of life are demanding action against corruption and discrimination and expressing outrage at the quality of life in the country. Quote, the street tells us with the most concrete, tangible, and clear statement that the masses of people, unlike the past, are not condemned to remain on the sidelines of politics, passive, indifferent, and mere spectators, but are active actors in social and political arena and challenge governments by continuously expressing their economic, union, and class demands. The street tells us where these decision makers have gone unilaterally and out of touch with citizens and poor urban masses, where they have taken a step in a dead-end road, where they have stood too far, where they have stood too close, where they are forbidden to enter, and where they have gone astray. Sardarnia and Al-Borzi warned that officials should consider the interests and demands of the protesters because, quote, a spark is enough for all the protesters with their many and diverse attitudes and goals to pour into the streets, and these movements will turn into small and big riots. Not making people's lives more difficult and limiting, both economically and socially, will be a positive step in regaining the lost trust. The academics also suggested that the government make protest movements official and create a free and open political arena and mechanism to express protests. Possibly the Ayatollah has to have his country torn apart to even consider the researchers' advice. From the Toronto Star, are Iran's morality police being disbanded, or is it just a revolutionary rebrand? Are Iran's morality police, long a symbol of the hardline regime's repression, finally finished. Reports in recent days have suggested that the force, also known as guidance patrols, was to be disbanded in the wake of 3 months of protests sparked by the death of a young woman in its custody, as well as simmering discontent with the regime. But critics insist the regime is likely just playing politics and making plans to rebrand its enforcement of its interpretation of Islamic law. Mohammad Jafar Montazeri, Attorney General of Iran, offered only a vague statement about the future of the force. It has nothing to do with the judiciary, he said. It was disbanded from the same source that it was established in the past. The guidance patrols were created in 2005 by hardline President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who left power in 2013. Since then, their green and white vans became a source of fear for women. Women were stopped and questioned in the street and other public places for wearing inappropriate dresses or scarves. They set up checkpoints in subways and in other locations. Azam Jangravi, a Toronto-based Iranian women's rights advocate, said disbanding the morality police is propaganda by the Islamic Republic to counter and downplay a massive nationwide strike and protest and to, quote, confuse the world. She said, I lived in Iran. Each security personnel can interfere with my hijab. If I drive without hijab, even traffic police can find me and seize my car. All security forces apply hijab on women. Morality police is one of them. Even if they abolish the morality police, they will create some similar police tomorrow, but with a different name. And that, honestly, to me, sounds like exactly what they'll do if they don't get thrown out. The religious bastards aren't going to let go. They're in power until death do them part. And it's beginning to sound like the people of Iran are getting ready to help them out with that. How long can you keep the people down? How long can you make their lives miserable, both economically and from a human rights perspective, before they all rise up and say, enough, it's over, you're done? While the Revolutionary Guard Corps has a lot of weapons, I'm pretty sure they're outnumbered by the regular citizens. They trot all over the turf that should belong to the army, and there's probably a pretty good rivalry there. Like I said before, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if the army took the protester side against the Revolutionary Guard. And what good is it to be in power of a country that's effectively destroyed? The Revolutionary Guard created a diplomatic incident in trying to handle all this. They were shelling Kurds, not in Iran, but in Iraq. So they were firing across an international border and finally said that they would stop. I'm pretty sure that's after Iraq said, we stay out of your backyard, you stay out of ours, or else, just like every other person who has wanted to rule by claiming the power of God to give them the right to rule, I'm pretty sure their God would disagree with the way they rule, because putting the beat down on your people is, it ain't right. I understand they say women should dress modestly, and they have all this stuff talking about America being the great Satan and all this and that, but the only thing they know about America is what they see in movies, which we all know is no closer to reality than Alice in Wonderland. Even women here who dress immodestly are kind of looked down on, might be looked at, but not looked up to. I'm not going to say they hate their people, but the bastards need to be thrown out. If they got to be shot, well, that wouldn't be the first time that's happened. Sometimes it's done, on the sly, like the Bolsheviks did with the Romanovs. Sometimes it's done right out in public, like it was done with Ceausescu's in Romania, and, more recently, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. Only push so far, and then a pushback becomes a kick in the teeth or a bullet in the head, which they seem to have done their level best to encourage people to do. Well, I'm done ranting. I'm going to get off here. Please, like and subscribe, all that stuff. Give me a few comments, and y'all stay safe. I'll see you later. Bye.